Nick, did we get the call-in?
Did not,
I can put, do you want my phone up there?
Yeah, we
or
just bring it
like
on
that?
phone.
I can just call him directly with my phone. Will that work for you guys?
We sent him call-in information.
Let's see if he answers.
Okay.
I have like one bar down here too, Sprint's the worst.
You reached my cell phone. Please leave a message with my phone number and I'll call you back if I can. Thank you.
At the tone, please record your message. When you finish recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options. To leave a callback number, press 5.
Hey Jim, it's Beth, calling from the Board of Corrections meeting. If you do want to join us, you can join on Google Hangouts, or you can just call back my number, I'll put you on speaker. Okay, hope you're well. Thanks, bye. I was kind of odd doing that for everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, I guess we can officially call the meeting to order. First off, I would like a motion to approve the September 10th minutes from our last meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Larry. Seconded?
Seconded.
Perfect, thank you. Having a motion
Hey Jim, how are you?
and a second,
Okay, do you want to join?
all
the
in
meeting?
favor?
I can.
Aye.
Just put you on
Those
speaker.
opposed?
Okay.
The ayes have it, and the
Okay.
minutes from September are approved. Our next meeting will be January 7th, and that is to be determined.
Yeah, can you
So
hear me okay?
watch the
Okay,
website.
yeah, I was on hold on that conference number, but nothing came up, so I'm sorry.
No worries. Okay, we're starting.
All right. Director Skinner, you're up.
Okay.
We're keeping you busy this morning.
I'm very busy this morning. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you all. I think it's been a while since we've been at central office.
That has been.
So I'm gonna do a brief director's update, just give you some numbers on our population, COVID, some of the activities we've been involved in. And so, first I'm gonna start with our COVID numbers. We've seen some increases across our state, some of our prisons, specifically ICIW, Mount Pleasant, and Corinda has seen a rise in numbers. Right now, we're looking at about 66 positive individuals incarcerated statewide. About 44 staff are positive. We have 2 currently individuals incarcerated that are in UIHC. And so, again, we can just continue to monitor those numbers and follow the master action plan when we have cases, quarantine, test, retest, test some more. So we've just been following a lot of the procedures that we had when we started the pandemic. So we'll continue to monitor those numbers, make decisions based on visitation based on those numbers, things like that. So of course, my medical team, Dr. Greenfield, and his team has done a fantastic job. The wardens, in terms of managing this has been a marathon for us. So very proud of the staff. Currently, vaccination-wise, we have 76% of the individuals incarcerated are vaccinated. We have 58% of staff that are vaccinated. And most recently, we have given out 400 boosters of the vaccination. So that's, we're moving in a great direction. That's at the leadership of Dr. Greenfield. Also, currently our population is about 8,003. We're at about 15.4% over capacity. So we're slowly creeping back up to prior to the pandemic, which was about 22% over capacity. We continue to work with the Board of Parole. We just had a call with them yesterday about our pilot program and about releases. Andy and I, the chair and I have had almost weekly conversations about strategies that we can do to get more people that are ready to go in front of them and the types of information they need to see. So we will continue to work on managing that population. We've been doing the feedback forums. As you know, I've mentioned them before for the last year or so. We finally completed the first 2 rounds. We've been to each prison twice. And so it's been a huge success. We were at ISP, the last one, and it was great because as these feedback forums are continuing, more staff are coming with solutions versus just saying, this is a problem, this is an issue. People our staff are really willing, they really care a lot, and they're really to problem solve with us. So Joanna took copious notes during those forums, and so what we'll do now, we're gonna circle back to all the prisons, their administrators, their wardens, administrators, and talk about the feedback that they have received from their staff, and then what we're gonna prioritize first in terms of things that we wanna tackle that are issues or concerns or barriers. And then we're gonna be putting each prison kind of on a plan, if you will, to address those issues or concerns that are going on in those institutions. So it's been very positive. We're gonna continue to do them. I think it's good for morale. I think it's good for retention. So we will continue to have those feedback forums. Next thing is Sarah Finneran and her awesome research team. We are working on a job tool classification dashboard. Of course, using us data and technology, we like to do that here at DOC. So we are basically developing an automated dashboard that staff can use when assigning individuals incarcerated to jobs. So it'll classify certain tools and look at the nexus of the person's risk with the type of tool that they can handle, okay, for a job assignment. And this is basically, again, to enhance and increase our security across all of our prisons and make sure who has tools, it's in the right hands, as well as it's more of a proactive strategy around safety. So that'll be something that we're working on right now with SAS, and we'll continue to develop and train staff on, but another way to use data and risk information and who would be most appropriate to handle a tool in an apprenticeship program or a training program or maintenance or what have you. So also I have here with me today, kind of halfway into my update, I wanted to introduce Grace Call and Greg Hall. Now, that's not by accident that they rhyme, but can you hear me?
Yes, we sure
Yes, we're
can.
here.
Did you like the rhyming?
Yes, great. I can go ahead and kick it off.
Go ahead, you're gonna talk about our latest initiative. Go ahead, you two, please, thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Greg Halls. I'm a senior policy analyst within our state initiatives division here at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. I'm also joined by my colleague, Grace Call. I guess I'll go ahead and give the full CSG overview. The CSG Justice Center is a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We represent state officials in all three branches of government with policy and research expertise. And our main goals are to develop strategies that increase public safety and strengthen communities. The current IO project that we're working on actually falls within one of our most oldest and recognized portfolios called the Justice Reinvestment Initiative. Normally when people hear about the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, they automatically think about costs and sort of closing prisons. But over time, Justice Reinvestment has grown to actually focus on what states want to tackle or their criminal justice challenges. At its core, Justice Reinvestment is a process that the states have been using, and they receive sort of individual technical assistance from our organization, data analysts, our experts in policy and practice, and then people just representing external objective perspectives. What we normally do is we come into a state, we work with the state researchers to collect and analyze related data. We do focus groups and interviews with criminal justice stakeholders closer to the problem statement at hand. And then we work with the state to review those findings and develop recommendations for improvement. Recommendations have now also grown to not only focus on legislative recommendations, but we are looking at administrative and judicial recommendations whenever they're available. We've been working with Director Skinner about a potential project to really study the impact of Iowa's criminal justice response on public safety during the pandemic. We've heard about sort of the mandates to reduce the amount of people in jails, prisons, and residential facilities in order to protect public health during the pandemic. We've had the chance to connect with some of the district directors, and we learned that they were employing new techniques such as virtual contacts and virtual programming, limiting the amount of drug testing, just really trying their best to ensure success for the clients in the community. And by doing that, they've been exhausting community resources whenever available. We actually took this project idea to our funders at the United States Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance, and they approved the funding of the project under the federal justice reinvestment dollars. So our organization has begun the project by connecting with the officers on community-based corrections districts. We're also thinking about connecting with people that are currently on community supervision. And our research staff have been working closely with Director Finneran to really understand the impact on public safety from keeping clients in the community and exhausting community community resources. We're working with the district directors to also identify new and promising practices that appropriately focus their officers' time and community supervision while preserving effective community supervision and public safety. We're hoping to provide state leaders with administrative, legislative, or judicial recommendations on whether they should continue or enhance some of these efforts that have been implemented during the pandemic, and really trying to ensure that we're promoting the success of clients that are on community supervision. We're also hoping to identify if any specific resources are needed to improve current practices. We've heard about some lack of behavioral health programming in certain rural areas, and sort of that some of these districts have to beef up their technology infrastructure to promote collaboration among stakeholders, and to also just come in contact with their clients. So on this project, I'll actually be serving as the state manager. One of my primary roles is just to ensure that we obtain the perspectives of state leaders and criminal justice stakeholders as we move throughout the project. Our team wants to ensure that our findings or recommendations are vetted by people close to the project at hand within Iowa, and we're now creating a bipartisan interbranch group of leaders to really guide the project, provide input, connect us with additional stakeholders, and vet our potential recommendations for improvement. Over the past few weeks, I've been connecting with different stakeholders across different topic areas, such as the county attorney's office, different state court administrators. We've been connecting with the district directors, the Iowa Board of Parole, the Sheriff's Association, the Chiefs Association, mental health providers, victim advocates, just a whole bunch of different individuals that will serve on this committee. We're anticipating that they'll be on the committee for between this month and August of 2022. We're beginning to potentially launch our project very soon publicly with a presentation. We're actually working towards scheduling that date now, but we do anticipate that there'll be 3 presentations throughout the project. The middle presentation will be sort of an update on who we've spoken to, some of the trends that we're finding in our data analysis, and then the final project will be a summary of all of our focus groups and interviews, our data analysis, and then we'll work with the oversight committee to develop recommendations for improvement. So I'll pause here just to see if anyone has any other questions, and Grace, if there's anything else, feel free to weigh in.
That was great, Greg, I appreciate it, thank you. But Beth or Director Skinner, we're happy to hear any questions or feedback or ideas that folks have from the group or anything else you were hoping we'd get out of your update today.
Thanks, Grace. Well, I'm looking to the board right now to see if they have any questions. Larry does have a question.
Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, Larry.
Okay. I guess timeline wise, my understanding that you're hoping to have this done or some kind of report by the end of 2022. Is that correct?
Yes, we're anticipating that our report and final presentation will be released in August of 2022.
So any legislative recommendations, you would be looking at those going to the legislature for possible action in 2023, is that right?
Yep.
Okay, but your report will also include possible administrative recommendations that could be done without legislation as well?
Yes, it really depends on what we're finding in the state. If we determine that some of the challenges could be solved by legislative recommendations, then we'll put forth those. But if there's anything else that's more judicial or administrative, we'll also provide those. It just really depends on the findings at that point in time.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question for you. I want to know about race relationships in local government in Waterloo, 1st District. I want to know if there's anything set up to try to bring the morale up in the Waterloo area for the Waterloo officers and also just for the residential facilities locally placed in Waterloo.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the first part. Did you say race relationships?
Yes, in the local area when it comes to law enforcement, the residential facilities and the Women for Change Center there in the 1st District. We just had an election just recently and it was said that it's a lot of race relations and low morale for the police and sheriff department, I guess. But I just wanted to know, is there anything that we can do to try to build that morale up or try to get things changed? Or do you have anything written up to try to deal with race relationships?
Yeah, so all of our projects going forward will include some sort of racial disparity analysis. I can't really go into like all the details about it because I'm not the researcher and they are doing some crazy things over there in terms of research. But we are thinking that being that we're focused on the community-based corrections, this racial disparity analysis would sort of align with what we're seeing in the community-based corrections population. So I'm not sure if it's going to go that detail in sort of the local law enforcement area, but we'll definitely include it as a part of focusing on community-based corrections.
Thank you.
Sir, who asked the question? I missed your name, I'm sorry.
It was me, Trent Keller.
Trent Keller.
Oh, perfect. And one thing I can do is we do have a couple other projects in our office with a little more focus on the direct question that you're asking. So while Greg talked about how we might be able to provide some supporting information on this project, I'm gonna go ahead and I'll reach out to my folks and have someone follow up with you if that's okay.
Thank you.
You bet.
Other questions? Well, I thank you for your time today, Grace Call and Greg Hall. I just had to say that again. You guys have been terrific. You guys have been terrific partners. Again, thanks for joining us on short notice. We're looking forward to the partnership and more to follow as this evolves. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
So I just want to finish up with two last items. The CGL report, as you know, which is the statewide external review report, is still in the works. I think they're placing final touches on a few sections, one of them being classification. We had a meeting with them. We hope to see a draft next week, although in terms of the timelines, their initial timeline was in December, but hopefully we'll see it yet here in the next week or so. So we'll keep you posted on that. Recruitment and retention is a really, really big focus for us right now. As you know, you probably, like I said last time, you've seen the ads, the billboards, Facebook, social media. We have told, and Randy, as Deputy of Prison Operations, and Sally, and have been doing an excellent job of getting to the wardens and district directors saying, you cannot take your foot off the gas. Recruitment in corrections is 365 days a year, all the time. We're always needing to hire. So we'll continue to look at various strategies. As I mentioned last time, we're going to be bringing on an HR specialist in the central office, and all they'll do is help and work with the wardens and district directors on recruitment and retention. Some other things too that I want to share with you that we want to do around retention, because one thing we are learning this year is that we can hire a bunch of people, but we're losing people out the front door. And it's like, my analogy was like, it's like filling up a water jug with holes in the bottom of it, right? Is that we keep bringing people in, but we still have people kind of walking out, so it just becomes a wash. So we really are going to spend some time focusing on the retention piece as well. And so we're looking at improving our hiring process, which means making the process less cumbersome, more streamlined. We've had a lean event with DAS, with other agency directors, looking at how we can change up our interview process in terms of making it just more efficient, getting people in the door to meet us, to get to know us, reduce as many barriers as possible. We're going to do ongoing interview, like rolling interviews, so those advertisements won't come off the DAS site, they'll just remain on the site for correctional officer positions. Also for work on onboarding, which means making staff feel welcome and valued, and make sure that they feel comfortable with what they're doing, feel comfortable to ask questions, things like that. We're also going to provide more consistent pre-service academies, making sure that, and Sarah Holder's an amazing job as the director of the Learning Center to professionalize it, make sure we're doing consistent training across the state, and people are getting the knowledge and experience they need to go get on the job day one and be successful. We're going to be asking our supervisors to regularly engage with new staff and existing staff. I think that's a huge piece. I think we have to think about developing a more expansive mentoring program, more peer support structure, and ongoing training. So these are the things that we're looking from a central office perspective. The HR person will help us, but we think in order to kind of stop individuals leaving one thing is we need to hire more staff because I think people are getting burnt out from overtime and mandates. But the other thing is staff needs support. You know, it's a very difficult job to work in a prison, and we want to make sure the new staff and existing staff have all the support they need to be successful. So we're going to be spending a lot of time focusing on some of those strategies here in the next year. And so I'll keep you posted on those activities, what we're seeing, what our numbers look like, but just please know that's a major focus for us right now. And that's all I have. Questions for me? Larry, I know you got one for me.
I actually have 3 questions.
Oh my gosh, wait.
And they all have to deal with recruitment. So basically, one, I know in the past,
No, you only get one.
in the past, we've had problems recruiting nurses. Is that continuing to be a problem,
Major.
Doctor?
Globally.
Globally?
Yeah, it's everywhere. And, you know, we do what, was it a $3,000 sign-on bonus for nurses? But you have hospitals that are doing $10,000, $15,000 sign-on bonuses, or they're having traveling nurses or temps. They're making, you know, really good money, and we can't compete. So what we have to do is talk about as a career, as a public servant, as a profession, and how you're giving back to your communities by serving and working in corrections, because, you know, the money is just unbelievable, Larry. I mean, what they're offering, I mean, even in, so for example, I believe in Nebraska, and this is for just correctional officers, they're offering $15,000 bonuses.
Really? Okay.
It's just like, it's hard to compete, but we have better benefits and we have a higher pay, but the millennials, the young people that are looking in, they're coming out of high school or college, don't care much about the benefits. They're thinking about the $15,000 bonus and the pay. And so we have to compete against Amazon, University of Iowa Hospital and clinics for the nurses, Unity Point, and Dr. Greenfield and his team have done a tremendous job. We have meetings about what we can do to get nurses in the door.
Is there still an issue as far as paying overtime? Or if the nurses are working overtime, do they get paid overtime? I thought that was an issue once upon a time, right?
They are now, but it's an
still not,
ongoing kind of month-to-month basis.
it's a month-to-month thing.
Okay.
And DAS is well aware of that, because we know if that stops, we're gonna be in big trouble.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we're keeping.
Especially with the, you know, the Coralville area, and the ULI's building another hospital, and everybody's looking
Yeah,
for nurses.
so we're gonna
yeah.
keep our eye on that and keep in good communication with DAS and the governor's office as these proclamations get closer to running out, to let them know the impact of what they'll have on our nursing situation.
We work closely with DS. We have about 14 different temp agencies now that we have formed alliances with. So
Okay.
that helps. But I think in general, we're seeing a great change in the nursing profession. It's not just working shift work in hospitals anymore. They work for insurance companies. They work for home health agencies because they want that 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. They don't want to work the weekend. Like naturally, they don't want to work the weekends and the bad shifts. So it's becoming a very difficult market.
Yeah. And I guess, are there certain areas that we are worse off as far as retention and hiring than we, as far as locations within the state? And is
Yeah.
the turnover more with recent hires, or is it, you know, people that have been with us for a while as well?
It's a mix of both. And Ward Dom, you can chime in if you want, but it's a mix of both. It's new staff, they show up for a day or two or a week and they're gone. It's existing staff that are tired of the mandates.
Okay.
And so it's a mixture. Our probably prisons that we really need to focus on in terms of hiring would be Anamosa, Clarinda, and Newton, and Fort Dodge. Those are probably our biggest ones right now that we are trying to support them as much as we can. You know, we're just, you know, it's a competitive field right now, but we're gonna continue. I think, you know, we've updated our website. We're, you know, trying to professionalize ourselves and talk about it as a career and the benefits and the service that you give. And cause it's not always about money for some people, but it's also about building a career and feeling good about what you do. So we're working on that as well. But it's tough, but we're not gonna give up, I'll tell you that.
Thanks, Beth.
You're welcome.
If I have a question, I wanted to know if there's more women or more men that's applying for the jobs for correction officer position, or are they recruiting any women for those positions, or?
We're always in any kind of approach we take with recruitment, we are recruiting for diversity. And so, you know, whether it be men, women, African Americans, Hispanics, age, whatever, we want to target all populations. Because we want a diverse work population. I would say we do have a lot of women apply, but the majority will be males. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, Warden or Steve, but I think for the most part, it's mostly men, but there are a significant amount of women too that are applying for these positions.
What type of education and what requirements do they have to have?
It's a high school education.
Just a high school education? Okay. Thank you.
Can you speak in kind of general terms about losing staff in a normal world, and then the pandemic layer,
Oh,
and then
sure.
the Anamosa layer, and then the mandate layer? I mean, can you kind of give a general idea of how that's affected corrections specifically?
I think, and this is, my opinion, and if, of course, Steve or any of the wards want to weigh in, but I think the pandemic certainly accelerated people wanting to leave because we were working in a congregate setting, right? And that's where we know, like a lot of times when there's cases, it can spread pretty quickly. So people that may have, compromised health conditions might not want to work in a congregate setting because they don't want to get sick, or they get a family member sick that might have medical conditions and things like that. I think that, the murders too also played a role in that. I think that we know that our prisons are inherently, there's risk involved with working in a prison. There's some inherent risk there, but it also, it shook all of us to the core in terms of that happening. And so I think people reevaluated, if that's something that they want to work in that type of environment. And then the pandemic continues, and then as you lose more and more staff through the pandemic, the murders, and other things, you become shorter and shorter on staff, which means the staff you do have to work more hours to fill the gaps. And so they're getting overtime, they're getting mandated, and they're getting burnout. So it's really important that we support the existing staff we have right now. It's also important we get well-qualified people in the door, because that's what's gonna help solve some of the issues we're seeing now, of people leaving because they're just too burnt out. They're not getting the vacation they want. It's because we have to cover those shifts because we have all those vacancies. So I think it's that combination of all those factors that are causing people just to burn out. So we know there's solutions and things that we could do, and we're working really hard to make that happen. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
You're the last one left, Dr. Hill. You have anything for me?
Just makes me think of social emotional learning
Yeah,
and taking care of the adults on that end.
yeah,
But
absolutely.
it sounds like you've got things in play to get that ball rolling.
Yeah, we're working on it. And I just want to say thanks all for your support during these last couple of years. Have been very challenging for us all, and you guys have been supporting us and by our side. So thank you. We appreciate you all. That's all I have.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, next we'll hear about trauma-informed care from Lori Woodard and Danielle Bailey.
Good morning.
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 I have a little combination of both notes. Is this better? Notes and computer to trigger me to remember some things to say. And then I think Danielle have some details, so I'll stay a little global.
It's like Grace and Greg.
Yeah, that's the name tag. So thanks for taking time in your meeting this morning for us to present a little something. So this morning we have at ICIW 632 women in our population. And I bring that up specifically because I want to say the most commonly shared experience for those 632 women is a history of trauma. And that's going to be the most commonly shared experience of any woman in a correctional setting. So I can assume any woman I interact with on any given day at ICIW has a history of trauma. And I'll point out for women, specifically, that trauma includes commonly history of sexual assault, physical assault, and different from men, the perpetrator are often someone that they have had a relationship with or in a relationship with, not stranger, but family member, friends, and maybe over the course of a long period of time. So coming to prison in and of itself is traumatic. Being sentenced to prison is traumatic. Walking in the door is traumatic. And we have practices in place in a correctional setting that are inherently triggering of the trauma they've experienced, and we can't eliminate them. Examples being personal searches, property searches, disciplinary processes, things that we can't change. We can't remove those things from our environment, so we can do a couple things. We can modify some of those practices where we can without impacting safety or security, and we can modify our approach to those practices. And for instance might be with strip searches, for example. So one of the things we did a few years ago was modify the practice. So now, for instance, when a strip search might be conducted, the woman may be offered a choice in how that's done. So that choice doesn't take away from the mission that we're trying to accomplish with the search. So she would be given a choice, for instance, we can do this way, we can remove clothing, proceed in this manner, or we can do this kind of in a two-part process, top half, bottom half. Now, so for women that have been there a long time and have relationships with officers that have been there a long time, the response might be, just get it over with. But it doesn't negate the fact that a choice was given. And I think we can all appreciate being given a choice, even if it seems like a very simple one. So the analogy I have for that is I was at the dentist earlier this week. I don't have really any traumatic experiences with dentists, but I don't like going, and I kind of have anxiety about what they're going to do. And at some point, the hygienist said, we have these glasses. Do you want to put on these dark glasses, or do you want to just leave your regular glasses on? And so she's offering me a choice about how this procedure is going to unfold. And I didn't know I felt real strongly about it, but as soon as I was offered the choice, I felt very strong. I just want to leave these glasses on, yes. You know, now, I didn't go into the dental appointment thinking, I feel really strongly about this particular thing, but as soon as I was offered the choice of, do I want these dark glasses on while they work on my teeth, or do I want to just leave my regular glasses on, I felt a little more confident and answered, yes, I'll just leave these on. Now, that didn't impact anything about the procedure. It didn't impact anything about their work. So that is a for instance. So anytime we can do that in the correctional environment, it might be as simple as during the intake process, do you want to sit here, or do you prefer to stand there? If it doesn't impact us or put us in harm's way or other people in harm's way in an environment, we can do that. So the handout that you have in your packet is 10, and I know it's not on the screen, but there are list of 10 gender responsive and trauma-informed approaches to either individual interactions or group interactions. And we introduced this to our new staff. One of the things I know, and Cheryl may have comment about this after I'm finished, or even.
I never have comments.
No, she doesn't. What our goal is to build these practices into our culture. And I think it's important for our staff to understand it's trauma-informed practices isn't a training that you attend and then there we're done. It's a culture. It's a way of interacting all the time with every interaction, every practice that we implement with our women. So we introduced this with our new employee training. That's our first layer of trying to impact our culture and have, being trauma informed. When I say being trauma informed, I mean a way of approaching, a way of interacting. There's some concrete things we can do. And introduce this with new staff, so it's a way of doing business. It's not an after add-on. So for instance with that would be, we train new staff. A question was asked earlier about education or background of new staff that we hired. High school diplomas, foundation. And we have, the fact is, a lot of applicants for our CO positions have no correctional background, no human service background, and so they're coming to us and we're providing training from the ground up, and we want to integrate this into the training. So if a new staff member is being taught skill steps involved in, say, completing a personal search, there's steps involved with that. Stand this way, arms out, and what we want to do is implement this language, this approach to that process in that training, so that it's natural and not an add-on after the fact. And we feel like this is what's going to impact our culture. And then the modeling with the existing staff, they continue to see this. And an example, I think, with before COVID, we used to have a lot of tours. There would be a lot of folks that would come out and want to tour the prison, and Cheryl would always announce to the women, we're having a tour today, this is where the tour is going to occur, we're going to be coming into G1, so that the women know this. Trying to think, and I'll consult my notes here because I want to make sure I don't miss anything. So some things that being trauma informed isn't. It's not, being trauma informed isn't a personality trait. It's not being nice. It is not saying yes to everything someone asks for. It's not ignoring or discounting behavior that's unacceptable or appropriate, but it's how we approach all of those things. And those steps, I think, do a nice job of outlining, and our training officer incorporates that into all discussions throughout our new employee training so that it's woven into everything that we do. Do you guys have any questions, any comments, thoughts?
I really like the idea of choices to the extent you're giving people choices, because I think, especially in the case of some of these traumatized women, that may be the first time in their life that they've ever been given a choice about anything, you know, that everything's been put upon them as opposed to.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really something that I would like to hear.
Yeah, it's powerful, and sometimes we're thinking of what choices we can offer on the fly, because there are. And then, for instance, would you prefer to sit here or stand there? It's easy, and it is powerful.
One of the things that we talk about with room searches is safety and security is why we do the room searches. But it doesn't mean we have to go in and just tear the room apart. I said there's no reason that we can't say to a woman, we're searching your room today, is there something in there? First of all, you got something in there you're not supposed to have, just go ahead and ask them. But the second part is there something in there that's important to you that you want to grab out? Maybe it's a coloring picture from her child. Maybe it's a picture of her mom. Just something that gives them the ability to be respected and the ability to be able to protect what's theirs. And I think that's the one thing that it's about trauma informed, and it's just about it's about leadership. And then when you start developing relationships, at least at Mitchellville, and it happened at Clarinda for me, is that people start telling you when things are gonna happen because they respect you and don't wanna see bad things. And so you get the people that are gonna say, hey, this is going on, or you need to look at this dorm because they're selling their, what is it, that they always sell, some kind of pill that we had.
Gabapentin.
Yeah, gabapentin. We always say Gabby's the main person in our institution. So anyway, it's just about, along with trauma informed, it's just about the leadership practices of how you approach humans, even if they're incarcerated.
I'm adding to that because if you can, and I'm saying this because I think probably everybody in the room can relate to it on some level. When Cheryl was pointing out, you know, an item in the room that might be important to you. So it is not hard. In fact, it is easy to escalate a stress response in someone with no trauma history. So you can imagine if someone does have an extensive trauma history and is always kind of operating in kind of a high stress response mode, the impact that would have. So for instance, with something that's important to you with my spouse. So I decided I was going to put the remote control in a decorative basket. That's where it's gonna be stored from now on. So when he sits down and wants to, you know, in his comfort zone and wants to turn on the TV and the remote control isn't there, and I nonchalantly say, well, we're keeping him in the decorative basket now. What? When did we decide this? When did we get a decorative basket? Why do we have to keep the remotes here? So because it's important to him. And he wants the remote where he wants it to be stored where he chose, right there. And I changed it up, I didn't say anything, and it's like, that produces a little bit of a heightened. And that isn't someone who's experienced long-term history of violence perpetrated by somebody he knew well and has ongoing relations. That's a remote control. So, and I offer that only because that's not the kind of things that we are interacting with our women. We are asking them to remove their clothing, to undergo strip searches. We're wanting to touch their bodies and do pat searches. We're wanting to root around in their rooms and look through their stuff and take it away when need be. So it's the approach we use with all of that becomes extremely important. Extremely important, and that's for the safety of the women. They need to feel like they're in a safe and secure environment. Back to Cheryl's point about coming to staff when they see that their environment's threatened by their peers in some way. It keeps staff safer. The difference between explaining procedures and just responding to questions before any kind of say a search or something is different. If I'm a staff member and I'm saying this is what we need to do, this is how this will be done, we'll do this, and then is different than walking in, just starting the process, and then me responding to questions. Now I'm kind of taken off guard. Now I'm not the one as a staff member. I'm having less control of the situation because now I'm in response mode rather than directing how it's going to go, providing the information at the onset, and letting it unfold from there. So anyway, that's a little recap. We're trying to impact our culture and make this just part of how we do business.
I want to add another anecdote, and this might include Sally, because we started back in the 80s. So when I was a residential officer back in the day, and I'm ashamed to say this, when I was doing a strip search, the woman was crying. And I use this example with when I talked to the new employees. She was crying, and I'm thinking, and my implicit bias, and this is why I'm glad we're doing implicit bias culture, not a training, is that I thought, well, you're a stripper. Why the heck are you crying? You do this for a living. And I don't think Fifth District ever trained me either in anything, at the time in the 80s. But now when I'm looking at it, or not now, but when my mind started shifting is, she was crying because she didn't have a choice. When she stripped, she had the choice. When she danced, that was on her, that was in her control. It was me controlling her. And so with that, what I wanted to say is part of trauma informed also links in implicit biases, because my bias was that she liked stripping, or whatever that bias is. So I had to start linking those two together and identifying them, not hiding them, not being ashamed of them, but just keeping that up in the open. So we're trying to do that at Mitchell, and I think that through the state we are as well. I don't know where the director is, there she is. Backstory, when I was warden at Clarinda, I would shake the guys' hands when they like achieved something good. And I remember an officer said, "Why do you shake people's hands?" And I'm thinking, why wouldn't I? And so it's just that whole shift in a mindset of how you interact with people. And our director has been great about letting us, most of the policies are written towards men, and has been great about letting us not do our own thing. Not that she opens the door and says, do whatever you want, but, alter those for women.
So is, you do this when they, new staff members come on board, but is professional development, does it continue? Because this is heavy, heavy stuff, and it can go really deep, and people have to look at their own trauma, and so does it continue?
One of the things that we implemented, and this was after we had the opportunity to attend NIC, there were several of us, a couple of different trainings. One of them was Safety Matters, and we had staff that are trained to facilitate that. We've incorporated that at ICIW as an additional layer of new employee training. And then to your point though, yes, in fact, it does get challenging, because like any other, I'm gonna back up, CQI, quality assurance, ongoing feedback is always the thing, it seems, that's easy to get left in the dust when other things rise to the top. And we're aware of that, and I think we can do better about ensuring follow-up and ensuring back to kind of mentoring, through those kind of interactions, staff to staff, peer to peer, that we can improve and make sure are really solid. And yes, it's a challenge.
Yeah, when you have 7 captains that are in charge of 15 officers each, but they're still trying to run a ship by themselves, there's little time to come in and mentor or have one-on-ones. Now, we want to require that, but that's just part of staffing levels. And I think back in the day, in the 2000s, when we had to go to we had to let go of some of our supervisors, that affected the CQI and the role and the modeling and the kind of the direct supervision of our staff. So, yeah, not saying that we're perfect by any means there, but we do what we can. So get us some more staff.
Working on it.
I was gonna ask, it seems like adverse childhood experiences are very popular right now. Do you take that into account, or do you just kind of look at their entire life? And also with the trauma-informed care for right now, is it kind of a one-size-fits-all and you hope to keep developing it, or do you kind of tailor your responses or how you do things to particular trauma?
Maybe a little bit of both. So the universal precautions approach is what literature recommends as far as our interaction. So I should make the assumption that every woman I'm interacting with has some trauma background. And I should adjust my approach and interact with every single person that's incarcerated there as if they do have that. And then, so there's that layer. And then I think, yes, through case management process with their counselor, there's also tailoring to meet individual needs. And that may come through group intervention services. It may come through services provided by the psychologists that are there. It may come through, pre-COVID, we had some volunteer programs that came in, provided seeking safety or beyond trauma, or groups that are specifically targeting that. So yes and yes. Yes, we're approaching everybody as if they have experienced trauma in their background. We're making the assumption that they have in some form or fashion. And then yes, we do try to tailor through case management individual needs based on maybe specific things that the person has experienced, or both.
And are ACEs considered separately, or?
We, in the districts, did this too, but that adverse childhood experiences has been something that was completed at onset at intake, and it often followed from the community. Anyway, it was already available in our system as far as what kinds of specific adverse childhood experiences someone had lived through. So we don't do that necessarily now, but through the assessment process, that same information is gathered. I think there's 10 questions on ACE. Yeah, so the information gathering about those things occurs anyway through our assessment process, but we don't necessarily complete the form. But yeah, is there a history of mental health issues from your parents? Is there a history of substance abuse? Was the parent incarcerated? All that would be gathered through our initial intake process, no matter what. We want to know that.
When I meet with our
Thank you.
psychologists, this is a pretty standard operating procedure for psychological intake, and the psychiatrists will, not only at the women's prison, but the men's prisons as well.
All right.
It's done a lot.
Thank you.
The question I have, well, it's not a question, but I just really appreciate what you guys are doing because it's very important. It's very important to treat people the way you want to be treated. Not only that, it's just how many times do we have issues going into work? I'm a barber in Waterloo, Iowa, or cosmetologist, barber stylist. But I go into work, and how many times do I go into work with a chip on my shoulder? Or how many times do I go into work with issues from my childhood? And as soon as someone says something, I can go off. So I have to be able to love, be able to treat people the way I want to be treated, and also be able to be rational, because sometimes we can be irrational, working jobs, doing overtime, being mandated to do overtime, and so on. We can be irrational, and as a kid, I used to hear people say you can catch more bees with honey than with vinegar. And sometimes we have a vinegar attitude, and we go in and we're, I don't feel like it today. And if someone gets out of line today, I'm gonna snap. And so we have to be rational. And I know that we also have to be stern, but we have to know how to be stern and rational at the same time. We have to be able to get them to do what we want them to do. But I love what you said about going into their room and saying, is there something that you really like? Is there a painting or a crayon writing of your kids or whatever the case is? But it's how we do it. I learned being in the business that I'm in that every client is different and everyone has different attitudes and different backgrounds. And so I have to be able to multitask and be able to take away from myself and learn to say, okay, this person I don't like. Let's keep it real.
Yeah.
I don't get along with them.
Yeah.
This person is difficult to deal with. And so I have to go and say, how can I treat this person with unconditional love and unconditional, even just a business attitude without causing a fight in my barbershop or causing the inmates to end up everyone not wanting to be obedient and everyone wanting to say, okay, this guard or this staff member, this correction officer, this warden is not in our favor. So let's just act out. So I really appreciate this trauma because there's so many people that's filled with anger and bitterness and pain and sorrows. And most of the women, I watched a documentary once and said that most women have been molested or had some type of trauma, and so they're already angry and they're already hurting. And so my mom used to say, hurt people. And so when they're hurting, they lash out. So I really appreciate the program. I think you guys are doing a wonderful job. I talk a lot, but I really think that we should continue whatever we can do to help you. I'm willing to help.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're ready.
Two Danielles.
I'm Danielle Bailey, this is Danielle McWilliams. We are both from the 6th District, which is located out of Lynn County, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. We both specifically work at the Anchor Center for Women, so we're in community-based corrections. We're gonna get into trauma-informed care practices, but we kind of just wanted to give you a little bit of an understanding on who we are and kind of what we do and why we do what we do. And so, we operate from a philosophy of supervision called Seamless. And Seamless supervision is a trauma-informed care practice, meaning from the start of their probation or parole, from intake to discharge, they're going to be with the same supervising officer. And what research tells us, this is very important in kind of being able to establish a relationship and gain trust, kind of feel like they have support. I don't know about any of you, but it's really unsettling when we have to find a new doctor or find a new chiropractor or, even go to just a new provider in general. And the same is true in corrections. Nobody wants to have to jump from staff to staff. And when we do that, we lose a lot of really good information. We can lose a lot of really good support and trust that we can develop with the person that is justice involved. And so here at Anchor Center, we are a campus that is both residential and field services. And so we have individuals that live in our 24/7 residential correctional facility. And we also have individuals that are on field, probation, parole, interstate compact that come into our office, for field services. So that's a little bit about who we are and what we do in terms of the clients that we serve. We weren't sure how familiar everybody was in terms of pathways to crime. And there are many pathways. These are gender specific. And so when we're kind of looking at pathways, to our justice system, gender really does matter. And traditionally, corrections has kind of offered a blanket male template in terms of how we respond and how we assess. And over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of research and training to change that course and offer gender relevant, gender responsive assessments and kind of intake practices. A big part of that is looking at these pathways. So for women coming into the justice system, trauma, kind of like what Lori was saying, I think research says minimally 75%, upwards of 90% of justice-involved women have a history of trauma. A lot of these pathways are impacted by the relationships that they have with individuals. Most of these relationships are unhealthy. They are not at our doors because they have healthy support networks. They're at our doors because they really lack that healthy support. So we kind of just wanted to give a little framework about some of those things. Danielle's going to kind of take over on this piece.
So when we look at how, like Danielle was saying, the differences between how men and women come into the correctional system, it is very different. what we do is tailored to women. So prior trauma and being the targets of victimization, so as Lori was speaking to, and this also goes for men too. So people don't just wake up one day and decide, hey, I think I wanna go to prison today, hey, I think I wanna commit crimes. There's usually a lot of events that take place in their lives. So what we're trying to do is just using those trauma responsive approaches to really help these women enhance skills. A lot of individuals that come into the correctional system, they already have skills. They really do. It's just because of the crimes that, maybe they've committed or what has happened, they use those skills in a negative way. So really trying to use those trauma responsive approaches to help them regulate their emotions, manage their behaviors. So the next piece we're gonna kind of get into, from a clinical standpoint, so I am a licensed mental health clinician, and so from a clinical standpoint, when we're looking at trauma, what trauma is not necessarily what happens to somebody, but it's what happens inside the body as a result of what happens to them. So when we're thinking about that, you think of that fight, flight, freeze response, and that is why individuals will react in the way that they do, because there's something going on in their body that is that's communicating to them, hey, this is a fight, flight, freeze response, and you need to do something about this. And so we're just trying to really make, both the clients and the staff more aware of what's happening inside them to kind of communicate so that they can stay regulated. Trauma can be something that is just a single major event. So maybe somebody was in a car accident, maybe they were molested, raped. It could be a one-time thing, or it could be a series of life-altering events that have occurred over time. And that's where we could look at like the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences. Those are gonna be examples of traumatic experiences. Or think about even staff, staff walking into work every day, what they've seen, what they've heard, vicarious trauma, things like that. Those are all examples. Basically, any event that can cause the nervous system stress, we can consider that trauma.
So kind of, excuse me, one of the things that I'm having a coughing attack. One of the things that we kind of really want to lift up and highlight, so for the last 25 years, there's been a lot of research and training around trauma-informed care, and a big part of what we're doing at Acre Center is not just informing and educating staff, it's about truly being responsive. And so there's a difference between knowing this information and then, knowing this information and then doing something with it. So if we collect all this data and we know all these things, but then we do nothing about it, that's a problem. And a lot of times what people do is they become trauma informed and then forget to follow through. And so a lot of the practices that we're utilizing on our campus are what's considered trauma responsive. And Lori highlighted a lot of these. And so some of the things that we kind of just wanted to give examples on, the universal precaution is kind of interacting from the lens that people probably have things going on within them that have been impacting them for many, many years. And it's not necessarily about what's happening in this present moment, but all their life experiences are impacting the present moment as well. And so kind of just having that understanding. Part of our other trauma responsive practices includes a strength-based approach, always trying to lift up an individual's strengths, things that they enjoy, things that they are good at, because that's where you get buy-in. I think we all want to do the things that we enjoy, and we want to be acknowledged for our strengths and our accomplishments. And that's true for justice involved women. The other couple pieces that are truly critical is having collaboration and choice. So Lori highlighted a lot of the choices in the institution. Some of the choices that we offer in community corrections kind of would include when an individual is coming into a residential facility, we have to pat them in for safety, security purposes, kind of asking them where they want to start. Do they want to start with feet? Do they want to start with the hands? During UAs, we have to collect UAs, especially for individuals that are on for offenses related to substances. That's part of it. Does people want to do it? No, but we have to. And so giving the choice, would you like to provide a your example at the beginning of the session, or would you like to provide one at the end of today's session? Just these little things might not seem like a big deal, but they really are impactful in building that trust with an individual. One of the other key pieces of being trauma responsive is having safety, trust, and empowerment as the foundation of the environment that you are offering. If there is not safety and there is not trust, you're going to have a lot of issues in your environment. And the single most impactful thing that you can do in terms of impacting your environment comes from staff. And if your staff are regulated and trained, you are going to have clients that are able to make the meaningful changes to allow them to come back into our communities to be safe and offer things that can be pro-social. And so for us, we knew all these things, and we kind of were like, how are we going to move forward? And we reached out to one of the national experts. Her name is Alyssa Benedict. She's with Core Associates. She also partners with the National Justice Center for Women, and she also partners with NIC. And so we were able to bring her as a consultant in 2019, and we have been working with her since on staff training in terms of how we can offer some of these individualized case plans, how we can train staff to communicate in specific ways, because if staff are regulated, then the clients will also be regulated. I don't know if Tanya kind of want to jump in.
Yep, and so again, like really trying to, I think that the staff training piece is super, super crucial. Because you guys were talking about earlier with like retention and things like that. I know even in community-based, there's been turnover, and so just being able to, we want staff to be able to feel like they're being valued, like that knowing that there is risk to their job, that they can still come to work and feel safe. And so part of that is doing a lot of that training. So just in building that rapport as well. So having relationships with the community, having relationships with one another, with administration, with management. Because the higher the rapport, the better the outcomes are going to be. So for us, we have myself, the on-site clinician, and so I'm able to provide evidence-based programming for the clients, and then I also can kind of serve as a consultant a little bit for staff when we're struggling with an individual who's more challenging.
I kind of want to lift that up too. Having Danielle on our team is part of being trauma responsive as well. So when we are staffing clients and we're trying to make decisions about an individual's life, it's important to have her, because she checks us and she's like, it's not just about safety, security. We also have to consider these other factors, and she helps to bring that really nice balance, because trauma responsiveness is about accountability and support, and you have to offer those two things, and it's a very strategic and layered response, and so she is very incredible to have on the team.
And I think too, Danielle highlighted an important piece. Accountability is huge. We know that the population we're working with, they have to be accountable for the things that they've done. So, all of this approach being trauma informed, and Lori had talked about this isn't about, woe is you, and we're not sympathizing with them, we're not trying to save them, we're not trying to do any of that. It's merely we are holding them accountable, but then we are also creating a safe space for both them and the staff, so that way everybody we can have those better outcomes.
And before we get into this piece, one of the things I kind of just want to lift up and highlight, so we talk about trauma responsiveness for clients, but also this understanding that the nature of the work we do is incredibly difficult. The things we hear, the things we see, the things that we have to respond to are traumatic in and of itself. And I went through 6 years of school, and nobody talks about vicarious trauma. And vicarious trauma is secondary trauma, the trauma that you have because of the work that you do. And I think a big part of what we're facing right now here in the state of Iowa, a big part of correctional fatigue is untreated vicarious trauma. And we really need to kind of lift that up and talk about it, because if we're going to retain staff, we have to be able to implement some things that are specifically targeting vicarious trauma. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up as a seed to plant with individuals. So this model that we are using, creating regulation and resilience, I just want to be very transparent. It is a communication style. It's not a treatment modality. It's not a group. It is very similar to motivational interviewing, except for creating regulation and resilience, often referred to as CR2, is rooted in a trauma-responsive lens and also gender responsive. And so language matters, the words we use, the tone of voice we use, all that thing, all of the delivery in interactions is so important. And so some of the things that we are finding and what research shows at institutions and community corrections who utilize this, correctional culture is reshaped in a positive way. It's improving staff interactions, it's enhancing safety, it's facilitating growth, not just for clients, but also staff. I think somebody had asked about staff development earlier, and this is one of the pieces where you're not just empowering your clients, but you're empowering your staff to make knowledgeable decisions, that they feel confident in the skills they have, they feel supported in the training that they've received. And also ultimately reducing recidivism, right? We all want to live in communities where we feel safe and supported as well.
The other piece too, while we do, and I know like a lot of this is for us, it's catered towards the women. The nice thing about the creating regulation and resilience, it can be tailored to working with men. It can be tailored to working with anybody. It's more, the way I see it is it's just how you interact with humans on a daily basis. It's just keeping an open mind, being understanding that everybody's going through their own stuff, and we don't have to personalize it when somebody calls you a name, or because if we're not regulated, then there's going to be not a great interaction that takes place. So this piece just kind of talks about, again, like, why does being trauma responsive matter? We want to enhance the safety and security of both staff and clients within the community, and the correctional campus. Just strategies to help staff cope more effectively with workplace stress. We want staff to be able to feel safe as they can coming to work. We want them to feel supported. And just continuing to use those evidence-based practices to facilitate growth and change among individuals that are involved with the justice system. It also is important because it promotes public safety and it helps reduce recidivism. The impacts that it has on clients, and I wouldn't even just say on clients, just on staff, it begins the process of helping people become more regulated and aware. If we're not aware of like what's happening inside of us, we can't do anything about it. So oftentimes I'll say to staff, or I'll say to the women, how do you know you have to go to the bathroom? How do you know you're hungry, right? Your body is giving you cues, and it's very similar to when you're about to become emotionally stressed, your body is giving you cues. And so helping people start to pay more attention to that, which is then, gonna help them, it's gonna empower them, because they're gonna start feeling better about themselves, which is gonna increase their compliance. It increases that community safety, and it promotes those pro-social attitudes and beliefs. And then this is just, these next slides are just,
We didn't know.
how.
So we just wanted to show some photos
Of what.
where we're located.
Yes.
Ultimately, just kind of open it up for questions if anyone has any.
You've mentioned recidivism, and how long has this program been going on?
So in 2018, the Anchor Center was repurposed. Essentially, the Anchor Center was opened as a male mental health institution, and we repurposed it in 2018 into the female campus. And so prior to 2018, our residential correctional facility was co-ed. We talk about being trauma responsive. That was not trauma responsive. And so we made a plan that we have to address this, we have to address it now. And we repurposed the Anchor Center into the female campus.
Okay, so Beth or Sarah, when would this show up in our recidivism figures? How are we Would it start showing up now because the
Started
program
18?
started in 218?
Were you really ramped up with the trauma stuff in 18 or 19?
So, our CR2 program, it was a process. We had to write a grant, to be able to get some of the funding to bring her, to consult with us. And so she started consulting with us in 19. We didn't start doing training until 2020. And then, the pandemic hit and it slowed us clear down. And so we have 3 certified CR2 trainers at our district, myself, Danielle, and our clinical treatment director, Colin Ryan. And we do intend in the next following year, we're going to be hosting CR2 trainings for staff pretty regularly. And so in
Okay.
terms of, is it showing up in
Not yet.
the data yet? Probably not yet.
Yeah.
About 3 years after pretty solid implementation is when I would start tracking.
Yeah, that's what I thought, that's what I thought.
I'll just tell you anecdotally, well, it's not even anecdotally, if you look at escapes from the facilities, they're slowly starting to ramp down, because we track and look at all just at the facility. And I will just tell you, I read all the CIRs that happen, and what I've noticed from the places that use trauma-informed care, again, and you guys talked about this too, you will see clients coming to the desk saying, I feel like I wanna run, I'm feeling very scared, I'm feeling whatever, and you read these beautiful CIRs from ROs who are talking to them. So then I took her to the back room and we talked about why she felt like running, we did a cost-benefit analysis, and we talked about the fact, and we took her to the emergency room.
Okay,
Or whatever, and so, that's the day-to-day stuff that we're seeing now, that I think, we're gonna see more of that down the future. I mean, I think again, that's places that have implemented trauma-informed care, that, I think what Lori said really struck a chord for me, because you'll see this in the CIRs too. If you're telling someone ahead of time what's going on, you're in control of the situation. If you're able to explain to them, this is why I need to do this and whatever, and you've got a person that's highly anxious or a person that's got regulation issues anyway, and you're not only taking control of the situation, but you're informing them about why it is you're doing what you're doing. And so I thought that was a great piece to see. But I'll just tell you, the districts and the institutions that have implemented this, you see a vast difference in how situations, potentially explosive situations are handled.
yeah, well, the program sounds great to me. I think it's very supportive of it, so thank you so much.
Did you mean the recidivism? What I was thinking is, you said it affects recidivism, but I took it as evidence-based programs affect recidivism. So if you implement something like this, studies show that recidivism goes.
Correct, thank you, yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought you meant, because I thought, okay, well, if you just started it in 2020, but
CR2 is evidence-based, and it's been around for much longer than 2018. This has been around, I think she established it in like 2012, 2013. And so it's been around for a while and shown to do these things. And we have noticed, just culturally, just the ability to see a reduction in explosiveness, reduction in even just like wanting to go to the ER, a reduction in needing to use jail as an intervention. And so while we don't have the data to support it, we do see it in our day-to-day operations.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
Just one comment, I really applaud all 4 of you for what you're doing. There's a reason why this isn't done a lot. Because it's hard, yeah. It's not done a lot in the community, but it's done in corrections, and you guys are doing a great job. The vicarious trauma is something we always have to think about, we always have to be in check with that emotion. But I really applaud you for it, it was wonderful.
One thing I wanted to add with that too, with the CR2, actually, when we're talking about it being tailored to, like, towards the it's interesting too, Alyssa has, there's a presentation, or it's a slide, I don't know, but if you look at different events of what clients will do, and to see the differences in how staff perceives it as a threat. So you could have somebody that perceives it as a much higher threat than somebody else, and then that's going to change the way that they respond as well. So those pieces are really interesting to look at too.
I love that piece. And just to tag on, when we started, I think, Lori, our institution really honed in on this, and that's when some of our staff are like, this is cupcake camp, people are disrespecting us, and it's like, you know, if a woman told, well, she did tell me, she said, you're full of shit, and I thought, yeah, my mom's probably, something about shit, and I thought, I could either take that personal, or I could just let it roll, and think, yeah, I probably am sometimes, okay, well, let's deal with what you're doing. Although I didn't think I did that, because Lori had to intervene, because my emotional got escalated, but I think that's part of it, is just us, and you said it, Trent, is just us being able to practice it as well, and not think it's just for them.
Well, and I think even too, like within the systems, you know, something we regularly practice within community-based is, you know, when we have a client in the office, you know, keeping the doors open, so if one of us does hear something get escalated, sometimes just bringing in a third part, just to kind of like, hey, you know, de-escalate it, that sometimes can even be a really helpful piece, so, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, when I saw your name on the agenda, I thought we have not heard from Dr. Greenfield for a minute. So, do you have some uplifting news for us? This is the aging population.
I don't know if it's very uplifting. Sorry.
You're not often the bearer of good news.
I just try to produce good results, but sometimes it's not very good news. Some funny photographs to show you.
That's a start.
Well, good morning, everyone. The last meeting, Larry had asked some questions about dementia and aging issues, and with that in mind, I was asked today to provide an overview of what we are doing about the aging issues in corrections. Today I'm going to do some brief overview of diagnosis of aging and dementia, what we are doing now, and what our plans might be. As you can see, there are some, this slide, and even the next slide here from the man himself. We tend to joke and self-deprecate when it comes to aging. Now that I'm getting nearer and nearer to being a Medicare recipient, I find myself, and especially my adult children, teasing me in a self-deprecatory way about my thinning hair, my memory loss. And why do we do this? I think we do it because I think the thoughts of aging for everyone are painful and scary. Losing one's mind is probably the greatest fear that anyone has. Prior to coming to corrections, as many of you know, I was a private practice psychiatrist, and my Thursday afternoons and Saturday mornings, I was a consultant of 11 different metro area nursing homes and worked a lot on Alzheimer's units. And I saw devastating cases of dementia. Why do we do the joking and the teasing? Because with any defense mechanism, it's easier to laugh about things than to accept the realities of the situation. But what we do know is the biological clock moves in one direction only. In the summer of 1960, I wasn't a very happy boy. In third grade, I seemed to be doing a little bit better. And of course, the 1977, I have a polyester suit with very wide lapels.
And you had a big head of hair.
And a lot of Greg Brady hair back then. And as any young man in 1977 would have at least one piece of turquoise jewelry, if you look at my right hand, I had that one on, but probably my puka beads were on my dresser at the time. But as I got older, I decided I needed to get in good shape. This is my first triathlon 25 years ago. And my current running partner, Hank, my little Labrador, he and I enjoy. And he helps me to age. But now let's get down to the real issues here, the rising cost of aging. And as we see with all aging populations, increased hospitalization, even in our Department of Correction pharmacy costs, we have seen in the last 7 years about a 10% rise in our pharmaceutical costs, especially those 55 and older. Big ticket items, chemotherapy, biologicals, what do I mean by that? Those are some of the expensive medicines that are used to treat arthritis, certain skin conditions, and GI conditions. And blood products to treat hemophilia are unbelievably expensive, $50,000–$60,000 a month just for one medicine. The cost of some of these agents has really skyrocketed. Not necessarily in corrections, but in the community, home care has become very expensive, but accidents in and out of corrections very common. And again, as a psychiatrist, I always like to hone in on the emotional cost, the fear, the therapy that's required for patient and loved ones. All those years I worked on Alzheimer's units, I used to say I spent about 10% of the time with the patient and 90% of the time with the families. Because it was such an impact. Larry and I talked about just a personal story he shared with someone that he knew that had a dementia case, and it's absolutely painful, and what people can go through. Aging affects us all from stem to stern, not just the mind, but all over the body. And some of the illnesses that we see in our aging population a lot, emphysema or COPD, thyroid disorders is something that's very common. Thyroid is a gland in the neck that produces a hormone called thyroxine. It's responsible for a metabolic rate. My thyroid doesn't work well. I've been on Synthroid for many years. But then obviously we're honing in on this lecture on the neurological and the dementia aspect of aging. So organic mental syndromes, what does that mean? You'll see that a lot in corrections as we document that. What we're talking about there is an actual physical changes in the brain or physical causes of brain illnesses as opposed to psychiatric ones. That's kind of an inappropriate demarcation now, because now we know that a lot of mental illnesses are actually due to physical changes in the brain as well, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. But for this lecture, what we're talking about here are actual physical changes that occur in the brain. Either one, primary in the brain itself, where there's been changes in the brain tissue, or two, that another systemic illness is causing issues in the brain. Such as in a lot of the elderly people get a urinary tract infection, and yet even though it's confined to the bladder, it has effect on the brain. Endocrine illnesses such as diabetes, or cancers, or even other toxic infectious processes can cause issues with the brain. But when we talk about dementia, what do we mean? A lot of clinical features here. Loss of orientation. Orientation means, do you know who you are, where you are, and what day it is? Memory, overall intellectual functioning. People with dementia then have a decline in how they behave socially and at the work site. Oftentimes they've never had any psychiatric illness their whole life, and then all of a sudden showing sudden issues of anxiety, depression, and physical deterioration. However, with most cases of dementia, it's a very slow process, going over the course of approximately 7 years from the time of diagnosis to death, as opposed to a lot of psychiatric illnesses, which can be sudden and acute in onset. People with dementia often lack orientation. They usually always know who they are, but the date is what usually goes first, and then the location, and then self. Short-term memory loss. People with dementia typically can remember things from their childhood or even high school years, but they can't remember things that are recent. One of the most fascinating cases I've ever treated was a man with dementia who was born and raised in Montreal, Canada, and lived in Montreal for his first 7 years of his life. Didn't speak English the entire time until he moved to the United States. I saw the man when he was in his 80s, and I'll never forget the day that his wife brought him an appointment. She said, "Doctor, you have quite a surprise waiting for you." Here he was in his 80s, and he couldn't speak English anymore. He could only speak French. And I would go to Alzheimer's units, and people could play the piano brilliantly, yet they didn't know the name. It's just, the brain is always fascinating, and there are always so many unusual things that I've seen in my practice. And the personality changes are very difficult to see. You know, very refined men and women during their lives, and then when they get on an Alzheimer's unit, doing very inappropriate things, and it's painful for them, painful for the family to see. And as the illness progresses, it even gets to the point where they can't even speak. And again, usually no psychiatric history. People with dementia can be very angry and sarcastic and silly, lack hygiene. And then the problem is that they become very delusional. What does that mean? They have fixed false beliefs that their wife or husband is cheating on them. And the problem there is a lot of the antipsychotic medication, either one, doesn't work, or two, there are FDA black box warnings on giving people dementia antipsychotics. It can lead to stroke and other significant issues. Dementia is considered a diagnosis of exclusion. In other words, there really isn't a test to get dementia other than an actual brain biopsy, and that's done very rarely. So what we do though, when we are concerned about dementia, we do various tests to see if there is some type of reversible cause. About 65% though of cases of dementia are the Alzheimer's type. Alzheimer was a neurologist, and he saw people that had significant mental decline, and he did autopsies and sliced their brains after death and found that there were tangles in the brain of plaque that attracted a certain type of silver dye. So he called them argillophilic tangles in the brain, kind of like plaque that filled the brain and grew as the Alzheimer's continued. But about 10%, and again with Alzheimer's, it's a very slow progress. It goes over the course of many years. But the other type of dementia that seems to be more common now is what's called multi-infarct or many stroke dementia. This is due to people who have long-standing high blood pressure that has not been well maintained. So it's a stair-step decline. They seem to do well, and then they drop off drastically, level off, drop off drastically, and level off. As you can see, my hand goes in acute and then chronic changes. But they have mini strokes, and when you do an MRI, it looks like salt and pepper in the frontal lobes of their brain. And then there are other types of dementias also that we see, especially like in Parkinson's disease. They will have visual hallucinations, usually of small children. And Pick's disease is a type of dementia that only affects the frontal and the sides of the brain. It actually looks somewhat like bipolar disorder in people who've never had bipolar disorder before. But again, there can be physical or reversible things that may cause dementia as well. Vitamin loss, B12, which we see in certain, B12 loss can occur in certain gastrointestinal disorders, or folate. HIV, and initially HIV was one of the first people to diagnose it were neurologists and psychiatrists because some of the first symptoms can be that of confusion. And there's also a condition that we have to find very quickly called normal pressure hydrocephalus. That's where there's a blockage in the fluid of the brain, and we have to get a shunt in there that can cause irreversible damage to the brain. After age 65, which is moving for me soon, 5% of us will have significant dementia, 10% mild symptoms. If you go from 70 to 80, that's where the dementia statistics really increase in that decade of life. And obviously it's extremely costly, about $20 billion and 60% nursing home residents will have some type of dementia. So what do we do in the Department of Corrections or in medicine in general? This is, we talk about multidisciplinary team. This is really where it hits in medical, the psychology, psychiatry, the medical professionals, as well as our correctional officers and nursing staff. So if we have a concern that someone is demented and there's some type of change going on, we immediately start doing a physical exam and lab testing to see if there's something that is reversible as opposed to irreversible dementia. A CBC or cell count, make sure they're not anemic. A metabolic profile, which checks their kidneys, their liver tests, their electrolytes. Their thyroid, like I explained, that hypothyroidism can look like dementia. And believe it or not, syphilis. Someone can contract syphilis in their 20s, not have any symptoms, and then it goes dormant or latent in the spinal fluid for 40 to 50 years, and then they can become confused. And so we do a syphilis test called the VDRL. As I said, at B12 and folate levels, we do all these tests to make sure we haven't missed something. We're trying to find a reversible cause. We're very fortunate in Iowa Department of Corrections. We actually have a board-certified neurologist on staff. He's one of our physicians at Oakdale. And Dr. Fordson does a lot of neuroimaging or CAT scans or MRIs of the brain. And what we see in cases of dementia is actual brain shrinkage. Increased fluid, decreased brain tissue. Oftentimes he would do obviously a neurological exam. Electroencephalogram checks for seizures. Our counselors do screenings called the mini mental status exam, or what we often do is the SLUMS, the St. Louis University Memory Scale. We also have a neuropsychologist on our staff who can do a more thorough evaluation of memory testing. What could it be? It could be an infection called delirium. And delirium means that they have episodes of confusion, kind of like a cloudy, sunny day where you're cloudy some days, sunny sometimes. So delirium fades in and out as the day goes on, as opposed to dementia, which is a constant confusion. The delirium can be very brief, and again, these visual hallucinations, which are very rare in psychiatric disorders. People usually have auditory hallucinations in psychiatric disorders. Visual hallucinations usually mean there's something really seriously wrong with the brain. Depression in the elderly is very unusual. Sometimes it looks like a dementia, and as you treat the depression, this pseudo or fake dementia goes away. People with dementia usually downplay their symptoms. People with depression will accentuate their symptoms, so there can be a very different type of clinical presentation. But I had one fascinating case of a woman in an Alzheimer's unit that I saw, and the son was very concerned about her, that she had had significant depression in her younger years, and then it appeared that she was demented. They aggressively treated her depression, and the dementia completely cleared. She went from going to an Alzheimer's unit back to her home within 6 months. So it's very important in the elderly that we pick up on the subtle nuances of geriatric depression. And again, trying to find a reversible cause. But what if we can't find a reversible cause and the diagnosis is dementia? What do we do? Several different medicines we use. Acetylcholinesterase inhibitors, kind of a long name, but what that is essentially is we want to increase a chemical in the brain called choline. So we use medicines like Aricept and Exelon and ribstignine to increase a chemical in the brain called choline. That helps with our memory. These medicines were meant to slow down the progression of dementia. I never used them in that manner because usually as a psychiatrist, by the time these patients got to me, the dementia was fairly progressed. So I like to use them actually to decrease the agitation and the belligerency that we sometimes see with dementia. The other thing that's interesting is some of these medicines now come in a patch form, and we put them on their back so they can't peel them off, and they last for 24 hours, and they work extremely well. Namenda or Namentine works in a different way. That affects a chemical called glutamine. Again, we also want to treat all the underlying medical and psychiatric conditions. There are some alternative medicines, vitamins like ginkgo biloba, which really does show some improvement in memory. But these are some of the medications that we use to treat dementia. Again, we oftentimes in the community have specialized dementia units. They're very structured, the same staff caring for patients, a quiet environment, frequent reminders or cues. These may slow the progression of dementia. Right now, we don't have a specialized unit for dementia and corrections, but if you think about what we do on some of our medical units, oftentimes it's the same correctional officers working those posts, it's the same nurses working those posts, they have their meals at the same time, they have their medicines at the same time. In essence, we're kind of doing some of this work right now on our existing medical units by the consistency and the approach that we're using. We also train a lot of our incarcerated individuals to be ADLA, or Activities of Daily Living workers. These are very motivated people that are highly vetted and trained, and I think they do an amazing job. They're very caring and offer their peers wonderful supportive care. So in some respects, we're doing some of this now. But our patients are aging. Over the last 10 years, we've seen some significant increase, about 22%. You can see from fiscal year 12 to fiscal year 21, going from 14% of the population to 19% of the population is 51 years of age and above. So our numbers are escalating. Currently, right now in the Department of Corrections, we have 31 people with a diagnosis of dementia and a solid diagnosis or attendant. So our numbers are still relatively low given the overall general population. So what's our plan here? I thank Larry for getting me in contact with the Iowa Department of Public Health. There's an amazing grant going on now with the CDC and what's called the BOLD Act, building our largest dementia infrastructure. I made contact with them, and I've now been invited to be a part of this liaison group with the Iowa Department of Public Health, looking at how we as a state are going to treat dementia. Now that COVID is somewhat slowing down, I've been working more closely with Sarah Holder in our learning department. I've produced several 7-minute vignettes on various mental illnesses, almost like mini podcasts that people have been able to look at. I had a taped 2-hour lecture a couple of weeks ago on psychiatric medication. I've got another lecture coming up on dementia. We've had several officers and staff now went to a training specialty in Utah on crisis intervention training. So I'm hoping now that we are really beefing up our mental health education. Given the numbers of people with mental illness in our facilities, this is just a must. And I really love to teach. I like to produce some of these lectures, and some of them have gone over fairly well. Some of them need improvement. But again, these are not designed just for our medical and our nursing team. It's for all security staff. Chelsea, when I at Mitchellville or at IMCC and see some of the new staff in training, I say, "So you want to be a mental health worker, huh?" And they all kind of look at me like, I said, "This is what you're going to do, and we're going to be here to help you." And also, in our medical administration team with Dr. Morris and Kathy Weiss and I, every Tuesday we discuss all of our important and significant medical cases, but we also then have a chance to talk amongst ourselves. We're looking at all of our medical units. Reopening our one in Anamosa hopefully soon, our medical unit at ISP, our medical unit at ICIW, and our 2, sometimes 3 medical units at IMCC. We're looking at all these units to look at their efficiency, patient census, bed space, and if possible, maybe there will be a time when we'll be able to have the staff and the beds to have a 6 to 10 bed unit specifically designed for dementia. Questions?
Doctor, you just touched on it a little bit, and I guess you mentioned there's 31 cases currently diagnosed with dementia, and are they treated on-site in the various facilities at this point, or are they brought to Coralville, or how does that work with those 31 folks?
A lot of it depends on the level at where they are at that time. I mean, so Tuesdays are my days where I'm always in Iowa City because at 9 o'clock or at 10 o'clock we have the medical call, 11 o'clock is the forensic call, and 12 o'clock is the mental health call. So if there are cases that are of concern, both medically and psychiatrically, they are brought up by various providers from all the prisons. And from there we decide the level of care that is going to be needed. We also have a new system of letters A through E where we talk about the level of care where they need acute care, subacute care, outpatient care, and from there we can decide what level of care is needed. Sometimes they are transferred if we have a bed available, but our medical units are very, very full right now. The acuity has been very high, and that's why we are trying to examine all those medical beds and what we can do to possibly shift some of these people to different camps.
And I would assume people with dementia are more vulnerable to the general population. Are we trying to protect them from those situations where they are being taken advantage of?
And on those medical units, there's a much higher ratio of security staff, medical staff, or ADLA workers. So we try to get them on one of those 5 medical units as soon as possible, especially when the conditions deteriorate.
And I want to really thank you for your follow-up concerning with the Iowa Public Health and the question I raised last. I really appreciate that. The fact that you are joining, I think, is really important.
Well, I can reciprocate thanking you for bringing that to my attention because I think it looks like a really exciting opportunity for not just for corrections, but for all of Iowa.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Dr. Greenfield. Steve, you're up. Do you ask to be last?
No, I just kind of
That's
get
by
put there
design.
again.
That's by design.
When we're all kind of.
Well, he likes to finish up with good news for us, right?
Well, it's not the worst news, so, yeah. Good morning. I just wanted to kind of provide a quick update on the FY '22 budget, where we're at, and then maybe we'll just talk real briefly about the '23 of what's been submitted and where we're headed. So, 22, I gave you some documents as to where we're at, and really I want to focus on that front page, the department totals page, and kind of walk through just a few of the areas, because they kind of, migrate through the other pages. It's just a matter of whether it affects the institutions or it affects central office or the capitals. But really and truly, 4 months in, we would expect to be about a third of the way through our budget in most cases. And as you kind of see, a lot of the areas we are. Some of the areas we're above, some of the areas we're below. On the revenue side, there's one line that the 204R, we're actually at, or actually not the 204, the 234R, we're at 400%. Well, why is that? There's routine maintenance dollars that we don't necessarily know what we're going to get in a given year. That amount is given to us after the year started. So that amounted to about $860,000. We would have put a budget amount in, knowing that we needed to have those lines open, but would not have been $860,000. So that kind of gives you an idea as to why that one is above what we would expect. Similarly, when you're looking at some of the other lines, the 401 and the 501R, those are more in the where we would expect. That would be our pay per stay, that would be our private sector pay, those types of things where we're getting monies from either the clients working or funds coming in to the clients and such. On the expense side, a lot of that varies, depends on when are we purchasing things, how far, the payroll is the tough one, because there's a lot of variables to that right now. Of course, we're trying to hire staff, so when we're looking at that 27% on that 101 expense line, it's like, okay, we're where we need to be. Well, that's not where we want to be. We're working to try and get some of those staff hired, but it's just one of those things where we got to climb out of. The thing that fights against that is our overtime numbers. So as you have those positions vacant, you're of course going to have more overtime. So it's kind of a balancing act, but really and truly when we're looking at that, we would hope to see that rise as we go month to month to month, that percentage, because we want to get more staff on board. We want to be able to fund those. We've already funded those positions. Now we want to just get them in place. And once again, hopefully that will ebb and flow with the overtime. It'll come down at the same time. The travel line right below that, one of those things that's hard to, coming out of COVID, hard to really budget. What are we really truly going to be doing? We have seen people moving around the state a little bit more. We've got more statewide training. We had a operation training at ISB not too long ago, where we had a crisis intervention type of thing, response, and we brought people from all across the state. Well, that's going to cost money. We didn't necessarily know when that was going to open up. So one of those things that we will divert funds, it's important. We want to make sure that we're covering those things. But in that given line, we may spend more money this year. Some of the supplies and stuff, a lot of that is dictated by what is the need, what is the availability of those types of things. So whether it be gloves, UA kits, any of those types of things, as it's available and as it's needed, of course we're going to purchase it. A lot of the stuff we had on hand from FEMA and from some of those other places, that now that those supplies are kind of depleting, and now we're having to go out and purchase some of those things. Well, some of those things are more expensive than they were before. They're just not readily available. So we're going to watch those lines as such and make sure that we're staying within budget, but at the same time making sure we have what we need for our staff. We go down a little bit further, the 408 line, the advertising and publicity, another one that appears to be way higher than what we would expect. Our recruiting efforts are going to be tied to that. Really and truly, we're putting a lot of attention and of course financial support behind that, of trying to get people on board and started up with our employment and keeping them there. Another one that kind of sticks out is the 414 line, the reimbursement to other agencies. This is one that's dependent on that time frame. It's front loaded because all of our workers' comp premiums get paid at the beginning of the year. So when you're seeing 80% of our budget has been expended, the workers' comp is the bulk of what's in that line. So we're paying that for 12 months. We're not paying that on a monthly basis, so you're not going to see that gradual increase. Another one that kind of sticks out is the 501 equipment line. That is an area where we're making some progress. We've purchased some body scanners, some other equipment, because that is our equipment line that costs over $5,000 we have to inventory. So those are very large purchases. Each one of our scanners costs about $148,000, the body scanners that we're purchasing right now. Once again, hopefully is going to help with contraband, going to help with drugs entering and other things entering our facilities, and just make sure that we're safe overall. Right now, those are aimed specifically at certain sites, so that we make sure that we get IPI opened at ASP, and some of those issues that are being dealt with K2 and those types of things at Florinda and some of those other facilities. those are the main things that I kind of wanted to point out, as far as why are some of them kind of out of range. Overall, I would say we're in a pretty good spot. We have set aside the extra $10 million that we got, and we have some of that either spent or allocated. We just haven't physically given it out. So some of those things that are in that pot of money, number one, we wanted to fund all our current positions, entirely fund our current positions. So if they're filled, and once again, as we kind of progress through the year, we've got money set aside to say, you know what, we expected you to hire all your folks, you did, and here's the money to support that. It's about half of that $10 million is allocated for that. And could be also some construction projects or those types of things that are ongoing at those institutions or districts. We also have additional positions that we've hired. We've got 12 positions at Clarinda that have been hired. We've got 2 at Fort Dodge, 1 at Newton, and then we've got 2 in central office at this point in time that we've identified. Those will be funded through this $10 million. We've got a job classification dashboard that Beth brought up at the beginning that's being funded for about $114,000. Our advertising, we want to make sure that that's not entirely on the backs of the institutions. You know, at this point in time, they are expending current general fund dollars, but they may need that replaced at some point in time, so we're allocating a little bit of that towards the $10 million. And then the final piece is the CGL external review that's happening. We want to make sure that we've got some funds set aside. There is going to need to be a response. We know that there's going to be things that they're going to ask that need to be put in place, or that they're going to say is more important than others, and we want to have some funds to be able to do that. So really and truly, all those things are kind of, not necessarily it hasn't been spent, but it's been allocated and really planned as to how those dollars are going to be used. The other piece that kind of comes in play is our CARES funding. So we received some CARES funding in FY21, and now we're kind of circling back, and some of those other things that we feel are important. The CARES funding does run out at the end of the calendar year, so we've asked for some dollars through the governor's office, and we've got some plans on doing some things, getting in some additional body scanners. We've got a Wi-Fi upgrade that's going to be for the statewide that we're buying equipment for, and just some other contactless search type things, temperature scanners, those types of things. So we're working towards getting those purchased, making sure that we get that done by 12/31, so that we can get those dollars reimbursed. The other major thing that's kind of going on right now, if you flip to the 4th sheet, which is the capitals, we do have a couple projects, or one major project that's kind of started at this point in time. We did receive about $4.5 million this year for the Clarinda kitchen, and we're going to receive an additional, I believe, $5 million next year for the Clarinda kitchen, so it's kind of a two-year project. That project has been started. We have done an RFP for a design firm, and that's been awarded. We have moved funds to fund that. So over the course of the next about a year, they'll be doing all the drafts of the drawings and making sure that everything's going to work before we actually start that construction. We would anticipate that construction would actually start probably late summer, early fall next year, and hope to be completed by the next fall. But that's going to be a huge thing, putting that inside the fence, allowing opportunities for our clientele to work, just a safer environment. Contraband is going to be minimized, all those opportunities. So that's one of the things. We've also got a couple of things in our capitals. We got a backup server upgrade that's happening at ICIW and IMCC for about $210,000. We're finishing up a couple projects. We had a building automation system upgrade that we'd received $500,000 for, and we're finishing that up hopefully in the next few months. That money will run out in a couple of years, but we want to get it spent. And then we've got a switch upgrade at Anamosa State Penitentiary right now that we're trying to get completed, because that money does run out after this year, so we'd have to give it back. So we want to make sure we get that done. So that's kind of a quick update on the current year. Before I go into 23 and kind of where we're at, are there any questions or comments or anything? Larry?
Yeah, just quick. Line 407, intrastate transfer shows a $10 million figure, but nothing's being spent there. Is there a reason for that at this point in time?
So that is that $10 million basically. So it hasn't been allocated at this point in time, but it will be, either it will be spent out of the current appropriation, or it will be funneled wherever it needs to go. So nothing has been spent.
Okay, so that's, when you were talking about it, that was line 407.
Yep, that would be that appropriation dollars.
Okay, and then, down on line 604, you talk about securities, and that's up 18. What are we talking about there as far as securities go?
And I may have to look and see what exactly that bill was. It looks like it's a central office, because I can point to the central office. So I'm assuming that's a statewide, something that's been purchased statewide that may be allocated to the districts and the institutions.
Okay.
So I'll look at that, but most likely it's something that won't remain there. It will be allocated. It may actually change how it's coded, based on how the institutions and districts would code that.
And then when we were at Newton, they were talking about some housing money, like $10 million coming. Do we know when that's gonna arrive, or does that go to the department, or does that go someplace else to be spent?
I believe that's actually going to prison industries directly.
Okay.
So it won't come through the department per se.
Alright.
But yes, that is still in the works and still planned at this point in time. I believe that it has been promised by the governor's office to prison industries. So yeah, it will not come through our budget per se, but will reside right through prison industries.
Yeah, it'll go actually through Homes for Iowa, the nonprofit.
Oh, it will?
Yeah.
Yep,
Okay,
yep,
all right.
that's where it'll go.
Okay.
You said switch project?
Switch upgrades at Anamosa. So that's a computer, how they talk, the servers and the end product, I guess. I'm not real techie, but it's that intermediary piece of equipment.
I think like a light switch.
They aged out.
Yeah.
They just need to be replaced. It's not that they're completely not functioning, but it's time for those things to be replaced. So, yeah, upgrades. Yep.
Any other questions?
Okay. I'm gonna move to 23 just real briefly. I'm not gonna hit a lot on it. We did deliver a status quo budget as promised in the previous board meeting to the governor's office and Department of Management. We are having ongoing conversations with those parties as to additional needs that might be available to the department if funds are available. We did also deliver, per the board's approval, the technology and the RIF projects that were on that agenda and that were delivered to you guys. Those have been delivered to the Department of Management and the governor's office through our budget system requests. So that's where it stands. The piece that we're not for sure about, and that even goes back to 22 and 23, is the ARPA funds, that other federal dollars. And I know we've seen some of those dollars being given out to different organizations and departments and community needs and such. At this point in time, we have put a pretty sizable request in, but we have not been guaranteed anything. We just continue that dialogue and discussion with the governor's office, who kind of is the one that will make those decisions. So, but a lot of the stuff that has been on our major maintenance list, a lot of the projects that we put on our technology request and our infrastructure request, the RIF request, those are ARPA requests as well. So we know that some of those other places, we would not get the money as soon, so we wanted to make sure we put it in both places and ask for it. So it was available and fit under the criteria that we would be able to get it maybe funded sooner. So it's kind of my update for 22 and 23.
Questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to discussion and approval of the board meeting schedule. And thank you, Joanna, for everything you do before a board meeting. We've all had an opportunity to look at it, and that's helpful, so thank you. If anybody would like to make either a change or a motion to approve.
I move to approve.
Thank you.
I second.
Thank you, Larry. Having had a motion and a second, we will vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that's our schedule for 2022. And can you explain to me a little bit what the legislative breakfast is gonna look like? Or is it changing?
Have we set a date on that? I mean, we're still planning on doing it. I don't know what the date is off the top of my head.
We've been discussing a lot of different options for this year that may make it different from previous years, so we're not really set in stone yet. But we will have some kind of breakfast provided, and we're hoping to have more interaction than previous years to hopefully have more people present at it.
Okay, and so February 3rd.
February 3rd, yes, and that is a Thursday, yes.
Oh, okay.
As a Thursday?
Yes, that's when we've traditionally had it, is the first Thursday in February.
And way back in the day, I don't know if corrections negotiated, certain hotels that would get a state rate. I don't know if that's a thing anymore or not, but since several of us will probably.
Well, so for state rates, there is and I can forward that on to you, there is a document, I believe, on the DAS website that actually has a list of all the hotels that would
that'd
have
be
state
great.
rates, so I will make sure that we get that to you, to the group.
Yeah.
Because I stayed last night at the Fairfield Inn out in West Des Moines, and they gave me the state rate of $88 out there,
Oh,
so.
good.
But I
Okay.
think when I checked on it, it's also possible, it's available at other locations. But if you're gonna do it, you gotta usually find it early, because sometimes it gets,
They sometimes only have limited blocks of
Yeah,
rooms,
exactly.
so, yeah, once they're used up, they would go to the normal rates, so,
And
yeah.
I agree with Larry, if you check the list, the hotels that are listed will provide it, but a lot of times if you ask the hotel you're trying to stay at, they will tell you if they offer a stay rate or not.
Yeah,
All right,
yeah, we'll get that information to the group.
okay, thank you. Any other discussion of board members?
is there any public comments, like, if we have?
Yeah, we'll do that next. So,
We should open that up first.
oh, I'm sorry, yeah. So the public, I don't know who we have, I don't know if we have anybody in person, but I don't know who we have online.
Nothing on,
Nothing?
Nick's monitoring our YouTube channel.
Yeah, there's nothing,
Oh.
we've got nothing.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
All right, now open discussion.
I just wanted to mention two things. One, I talked to Rick Lemire earlier this week by phone to visit and see how he was coming along, and everyone will be happy to know he has given up breaking in horses. So he doesn't, I think hopefully broken bones are a thing of the past for Rick, but he's conceding to age that maybe that's not a wise thing to do anymore, and I'm not sure it was a wise thing ever for him to do. Anyway, he sends along his highs to everybody. And then last night, Kim and I had visit, for those of you who go back a little farther, Chuck Larson, Senior. We visited with him and Ellen last night, and so that was a pleasure. He's such a gentleman, and so it was a pleasure to visit with him as well. So, former members of the board, for those of you who don't know who those folks are
And Board of Parole.
and Chuck was also Board of Parole as well. That's right, as well as a multitude of other public service titles over the years. So.
Anybody else? All right, looks like we are ready to adjourn. I have a motion to adjourn. Do we have to do that? Yeah.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Officially adjourns. Meeting.